morning, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. My guest is Peter Phillips. Peter has been a professor of political sociology at Sonoma State University since 1994. He was the director of Project Censored, which is something I've followed over the years. From 1996 to 2010, president of Media Freedom Foundation from 2003 to 2017. And he is the author of the new book, Giants, the Global Power Elite. Peter, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Charles.
You know, Peter, your book seems to pick up where C. Wright Mills left off in his seminal work of the 1950s, The Power Elite, which was about America and the kind of loose collection of wealthy elites who shaped our society both openly and not so openly. And you bring it up to a more international level. So talk a little bit about your thesis and how you arrived at it.
Well, C. Wright Mills was writing in the 50s, and he was one of the first sociologists to talk about a power elite in the United States. I mean, other people had written about the upper class and things like that, but he really kind of laid it out. And he said there's a structure to it that includes, high elites in the business and government and the military, and kind of a post-World War II thing. And he, in a sense, sociology began to become kind of radicalized in the 60s, looking at these issues. And a lot of people were engaged, particularly William Domhoff, Bill Domhoff, at UC Santa Cruz. He wrote a book called Who Rules America, where he laid out the nature of the upper class and who they were in the United States. And then a number of researchers looked at various aspects of power in the country, the Council of Foreign Relations, a number of different groups. All that was great, but what happened in the 70s during the Carter administration was we see another crisis in capitalism. Profits aren't increasing, and this time the response from capitalists was to globalize. And that's what's been going on since that time. We've been globalizing, engaging in business investments worldwide. And that has changed the nature of the global power elite. They're now transnational. So we start to use the terminology 20 years ago, the transnational capitalist class. And my book is a look at the core of that, which is all about capital. So there's 17 giant investment companies, banks, and just straightforward investment companies that have over $1 trillion of investment capital that they manage. And those 17 are all invested in each other. So it's one big cluster connection of global capital. They're invested literally everywhere in the world, or want to be everywhere in the world. And there's only 199 people that manage those 17 firms. In 2017, they were controlling $41 trillion worth of wealth. Now it's closer to 50 trillion. And we call this the financial core of global capitalism, not only the people, but the money. So governments, intelligence agencies, the American NATO empire in the world is there to protect this centralized capital and allow it to grow and expand.
You know, in a way, what you seem to be talking about is what President Eisenhower tried to sort of blow the whistle on in his last day in office, when he made reference to the military-industrial complex, something that he knew a lot about because he was sort of a part of it, and that he talked about this kind of informal collusion, if you will, between big business, multinational business, and government and other sectors, and that we should be aware of it. And you also, in your book, you name names. You get into who these people are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, it's one thing to theorize a transnational capital class. It's another thing to say, these are the people managing this $50 trillion worth of wealth. There's only 199 of them. We name them. We say who they are, where they live, where they went to college, how they're interconnected with each other. And they literally all know each other personally or know of each other in a very real way because they're all watching what each of these 17 companies are doing. And then there's, literally hundreds of other investment companies under $1 trillion. And last year, there were 3 new ones at $1 trillion. So there's this capital, the control of money and the financialization of the world literally is just ongoing. Now there's a couple big problems with this. One, they have more capital and they've got safe places to invest it. So that can lead to speculative investments like the subprime mortgage loans and that kind of thing, which literally almost brought down the entire system in 2008. The other area that they try to buy up anything that they can get a return on. So that's public resources. So privatization of water and utilities and and highways and universities, anything they can get a return on, they're going to try to buy up and privatize. And this is land worldwide. I mean, it's quite amazing where they invest in what they do. So there's a privatization of the world going on through this process. And they still have more capital than they have good, safe places to input it. So one of the permanencies of this crisis of capitalism is war. We're literally in permanent war today, and it spends money. They make a profit on it. They blow things up and they fix them. It's an elaborate scheme, literally, to continue to have profits and grow and prosper for the 1% of the people in the world. And that's, in a sense, I mean, you think, well, that's conspiratorial. It's not a conspiracy. It's how capital is structured. It has to keep growing. If it doesn't grow, then it stagnates and we have economic collapse. So everybody engaged in that is trying to find safe ways to invest, get a positive return, and all the government support agencies will engage in activities to allow them to invest anywhere in the world, to discourage governments from interfering with them, and in some cases initiate regime changes so that capital can invest more openly.
I think your thesis is quite right, and I think it is conspiratorial, but we're all conditioned to view anything that's conspiratorial as kooky and crazy and that there's something wrong with us. But yet, your position and your thesis, I find it's one that sort of exists both on the left and on the right. On the left, you have it mainly focused on mere capital and profits by those who are the richest in the world. And on the right, you have that also, but you also have more of an idea of the weakening of national sovereignty and the merge toward world order and all those kinds of conspiracies. But when you get down to it, it seems to me basically to be the same thing. And that is that there is this unelected elite that manipulates the United States and other nations in a way that profits them and that increases their power. And that can at times mean things like depressions and inflations and wars and other things. How much are these people that you name involved in what we might call social engineering?
Well, to varying degrees, they're all engaged in that. Social engineering can include how the media misinforms the world, the corporate media. Sure. And these 17 giants are all directly invested in the 6 major media corporations in the world today. So television news content is primarily provided by public relation firms that create news stories that we get to see that are packaged by private companies on behalf of capital, of profit making. They're trying to sell us stuff. They're trying to sell us on how great capitalism is. They equate the word democracy and capitalism together. And all of that is seriously misconstrued. And then they'll find the enemies. The enemy of the day is Maduro and Venezuela, and then openly lie about what he's doing. And lie about that he won the elections there by 2/3 of the people, and then try to undermine and have a regime change there, engineered from outside.
Right.
And what we see is the people that recognize Godot, the head of the assembly there, as the legitimate president. The countries that did that are all the same countries. They're part of this global power elite concentration of capital. The European countries, the U.S., Canada, some selected South American and Mexico, but primarily they're either dominated directly by the United States, and then countries around the world in Africa and Southeast Asia, none of them have recognized Godot. So it was to me a demonstration of the impact of this concentration of global wealth, because they want to open up. It's the largest oil reserve in the world. There are lots of other minerals in Venezuela, like coltan, which is used in every cell phone in the world. So they really want to invest and use and access the resources that are there. So they run out of places to invest. So engineering coups that open up a whole new segment is a major part of how the power elite manipulate what's going on in the world. And they don't have to sit in a room and say, let's do this.
Right.
Because the intelligence agencies are going to do it for them.
Plus they
Trump
also
will do it for them.
They tend to, they don't need to sit around in a smoke-filled room somewhere. They all think alike. And I think that maybe it's my more conservative take on it, but I see this as going back to really World War I and the emergence of what was euphemistically called at the time the Anglo-American establishment, that goes back to Cecil Rhodes and a kind of a coordination between British and American very big businesses like the Rockefellers and whatnot. And that the trend has been, as you say, a move toward privatized government, informal government, where you have large segments of our life administered not by the elected officials under the Constitution, but by private entities, like the Federal Reserve, for example, which is a private entity that gets to decide the value of our dollar and that can manipulate. Talk about social engineering. I mean, they can change people's lives overnight. And big group, you mentioned the Council on Foreign Relations. They tend to decide things like war and peace, and they influence the federal government. Every Secretary of State, starting with, I think, in the Roosevelt administration, has been a member of it. Hillary Clinton referred to it in a speech while she was Secretary of State as the mothership. And that they tend to, decide, along with the British, Chatham House and other of these sort of foreign policy groups, where we're going to go to war next. And that their boards of directors are made up of these very same people that you're talking about, big multinational wealth combines who are into money and who are into informal government. They're into sort of running governments without formally being a part of the government.
In some cases, that's deliberate. And as we look at the transnational nature of that, there's 3 organizations in my book that we talk about. Mm-hmm. One is it's the Council of 30, and it's based in Washington, D.C. It's 32 of the top central bankers in the world, funded privately, that make policy recommendations to the World Bank, to various treasuries around the world, that are seen as instructions, not so much as policy. But if the Council of 30 says do this, it's done. And tied closely into that is the private nature of the Trilateral Commission. Mm-hmm. Formed in 1973 with Rockefeller money and Brzezinski. They went to the Bilderberg Group and in Europe and attended there, and thought, we need to do that here in the U.S. So they formed the Trilateral Commission, which was originally Japanese, European, and American policy top business people, corporate heads. Now it's 400 people in 40 nations worldwide. They meet annually, and then they meet regionally in Europe and Asia and the U.S. And if anybody's in the council, the Trilateral Commission, and they go into government, then they're asked to resign and someone else will come in. So it's very private. It's only big business people that are involved in that. And they set policy recommendations that are looked at very seriously by the White House, the CIA, England, Germany, France, worldwide. And then there's the security element of this, and it's called the Atlantic Council, which is made up of NATO nation members, but it's also private, non-governmental funded. And they're the ones that have been increasingly in the paper making recommendations about censorship on the internet, and very engaged in that, and say certain sites just shouldn't be there. We have to get rid of them. They're lying. And they're the ones that have been targeting Russia and really negatively laying out how bad Russia is, how Putin needs to be forced out. They're open about wanting a regime change in Russia.
Right.
And Putin's very aware of that too. So the Atlantic Council is the security group, transnational group, making policy recommendations for worldwide security.
What you're saying reminds me of, and I can't name the specifics, but it was during the Obama administration that President Obama started lobbing missiles at Libya, and there was a congressional meeting about it, and it was a congressman who asked the Secretary of Defense, he said, "Where did you get the authorization to launch this war? We didn't authorize it. Congress is supposed to authorize this. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution." And his answer was, well, we don't need Congress to authorize it. We went to NATO. And no one really knew why they were doing this. It led to a disaster there. It further, it created a radicalized regime. And I think that that's an example, just one of many that could be cited, that's of what's going on here. That the American people, through our representatives in Congress, have lost control over conducting our own affairs around the world. And also the whole phenomena of central banking, it's a relatively new thing. It really only started to take off in the late 19th century. In the United States, it took off with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And what it is a private cartel of bankers and investors, domestic and international, deciding the value of our currency. And that runs against the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress shall regulate says coin, issue coin and regulate the value thereof. Coin means money. And so gradually, I think since that time and around World War I, we've been moving in this direction that you describe, where you have this informal, increasingly international group of faceless, wealthy business people influencing more and more aspects of our lives and of our destinies.
Well, we name 389 of them in the book, and we say these are the people individually who could change this and make a difference in the world. And I think what we're looking at is a crisis, not only of capitalism, but a crisis of humanity. Environmentally, we're in great danger. That's massive. And we have the inequality in the world today is just magnifying. It's just getting even greater and greater. So that 80% of the people in the world live on less than $10 a day. Half live on less than $3 a day. It's that 1% that literally controls 90% of the wealth. It's not like they have it, they control it. And all that wealth, the decisions of how to spend it, what it's done for, building a military empire that's a NATO U.S. based. And NATO is interesting because it's in their charter that the head of NATO always has to be a U.S. military general.
Right.
Excuse my phone here, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think the point's well taken. I mean, NATO is like virtually a standing army. And you also mentioned how they manipulate the media. They've consolidated control. Whether we like him or not, President Trump, I think, accurately has tried to call out fake news. And recently, even I think it was yesterday, he's in Japan meeting the prime minister and the editor of Time magazine, who's not a well-known name, but he went out with this tweet with a completely false story. He said, President Trump said that Kim Jong-un would be a better president of the United States than sleepy Joe Biden. Now, he completely made that up. But the problem, and he apologized for it the next day when Trump called him out and said that said it in jest. He said it was supposed to be humorous. But the fact is that that was picked up by Nancy Pelosi, who retweeted it, and by Schiff, who retweeted it, and several of the enemies of Trump, and also internationally it was picked up. And it became like almost a standard story. And I'm only bringing this up to illustrate how and he's not going to be fired. Nothing will come of it. He's fine. The point I'm making here is that the media can manipulate something if they don't like someone. And it's one thing to criticize legitimately policy, and, certainly that's freedom of the press. But to make something up whole cloth and to go out with that, and then to have that boomerang around the world through the internet, that's a serious problem. I mean, I think that gets to this issue of media manipulation, and we could talk about that going on all sides. I'm just bringing this up as one example, but I mean, how they're shaping our perceptions. I mean, you're a sociologist, political sociologist. You might want to comment on how the media now is more involved than ever in shaping how we perceive the world, how we perceive each other.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I had 14 years with Project Censored and put out 14 books on what wasn't being covered by the news every year. And
right.
That project's still ongoing, and it's going on. It'll be
excellent
hitting.
Project. I've relied on it over the years.
Yeah. And what's amazing about this, and when we look at how corporate media is marketing and presenting information, it's tightly controlled. It's all about protecting global capital. It's about convincing you to buy things. And then it's convincing you that the way the capital system is working is the only way that's possible, and that we have to continue to do this, and then lying about anybody who's in opposition to that. Now, Trump is meeting the needs of global capitalism. He certainly allowed for the repatriation of profits. He changed the tax laws. They have rewritten the regulations on investments that Obama put in place after 2008. They serve the White House, and I'd say the same thing for Obama. It serves Wall Street, and it's very deliberate. I mean, they want to protect their profits and their actions. So it's not just the White House; it's the entire government.
Right.
And then they meet in a variety of places and make plans and discuss issues. Of course, transnationally, it's at Davos every year. The top 1,000 corporations can send 5 people.
Right.
One of them has to be a woman. And, they meet, thousands of them meet every year in January. The Bohemian Grove, just a few miles from where I live, has 2,400 members in the Grove. They're people from all over the country, mostly California, but all over. And then every year they'll have 700 guests. And so
a very strange group of people, events going on over there. And
well, it's a fraternity ritual sort of thing. But
yeah, and then there's the Bilderberg. The Bilderbergers meet once a year in Europe, and it's the same thing. You have the top elite multinational people, Bill Gates, the very wealthiest, meeting and rubbing shoulders with the heads of state. And there's kind of this, they come out with some sort of a statement which is very secretive. And, this is how this whole thing seems to work. Now, what can be done? I mean, here we are doing this little radio, this internet show. Their internet is being increasingly censored, which is really something I'm not surprised about. I mean, when I got into this, I thought, here's a great format for free speech, but I now know that that's not exactly true. But another thought I have about this is that you talk about the growing gap between rich and poor. I think that part of that is because these very wealthy combines of wealth, they're not interested in creating anything. They're not starting businesses. They're not inventing. They're not producing. They're just making money for money. It's they're buying up already old existing things, and the result is it's a stultifying effect on the ground up capitalism that most people naively assume is what this country's about, where you can have a small mom and pop business or an inventor come up and start a company and create something. They don't want that kind of challenge. They're not even really capitalists. It's more of a kind of a corporate, it's even, I would use an old-fashioned word to describe it, that's fascist. I mean, it's a collusion between corporations and government. I mean, Mussolini had a corporation of, council of corporation to help him run the country as opposed to a Congress. You had monopolistic corporations in Italy who worked hand in glove with him and his government, and they were able to have monopolies on various sectors of the economy. I'm not saying that we're at that point, but in a more informal sense, off of the official government, it is moving in that direction, and it's crushing regular business and the ability to compete and the ability to create capital and to create business.
Charles, the 20th century fascism in Germany and Italy and Spain were nation state fascist activities where strong leaders made agreements with various segments of the working class that they would be benefited, and they were. And they would have scapegoats and that sort of thing that would go along with that, but there was a benefit to certain segments. Now we're looking at a transnational capitalist class that is worldwide, that is building a worldwide police state with very in-depth, sophisticated monitoring electronically of everything we say and think and do, with a propaganda that would make Goebbels just be jealous as could be, methodology of corporate media. So we're really looking at a very dangerous 21st century fascism that has to address the crisis of capitalism, but isn't making benefits to anybody in that process. It's a repression. Wealth continues to concentrate. People have less and less. There's a precariat, working class people that are precariously in decline, and they will vote for someone they think is like Trump, who's in opposition to Washington and speaks out against that. But there's no benefit for them. They think he's making deals and trying to get the Chinese to invest in the U.S. or other countries, but the working conditions for the people are quite bad. And we're seeing massive increase in homelessness in the U.S. We are in decline, and our working class is in decline. And it's only the top 20% or so that have any wealth whatsoever. 80% of the people basically are surviving paycheck to paycheck. And half the people in the world have half the people in the U.S. have a zero net worth. So, it's quite severe. It's ongoing. It impacts people's lives. 30,000 people a day die in the world from malnutrition when there's more than enough food to feed everybody in the world. It's just a matter of distribution. A third of all the food in the world's thrown away because they can't sell it to anybody. They're not going to give it to people to eat if they can't make a profit on it. And that is, to me, a humanitarian crisis that we have to face and deal with. What kind of a world are we going to have? This, privatized, top-down controlled, democracy meaning capitalism versus, somewhere that we all have some process and democratic understanding collectively about what to make happen. We're not there. We're not there at all. And young people are 40% of the country now think socialism is a good idea because they want to see a democratic process where people can be involved and they can benefit. And that's not happening in terms of where we're going right now.
Well, I mean, I agree with the broad thesis here, and I certainly do think that President Trump is a part of the establishment. However, I think less so than recent presidents. And on specifics, I do think at least he's giving voice to certain principles that I think would lead to more prosperity for average people. I mean, I think that the business of protecting American industry and labor versus, allowing foreign nations to dump products. I think the idea of the putting America first, national sovereignty, as opposed to this informal world order where foreign bureaucrats get to make decisions that affect our lives and futures. These are principles that he articulates, and I think that some of the opposition to him, which is more fierce than anything I've seen in my lifetime, comes from this military industrial complex that Eisenhower talked about, what Trump calls the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And I think that that's part, and his movement is part of a movement worldwide, which involves people waking up to these realities. As far as young people being attracted to socialism, I mean, I honestly don't think they have any idea what socialism actually is. It's been tried. It was tried in Nazi Germany. It was tried in the Soviet Union. They're not really connected to. Maybe that's a product of the dumbing down of the education, which is another subject that we could get into in terms of how something has been controlled by these power elites. But please comment, and also please let my listeners know where they can get your excellent book and information about your work.
Well, Giants, the global power elite, is available in bookstores all over the country. We're just going into our third printing. If people search Giants, the global power elite, on any search engine, you're going to get the normal ones like Amazon and those, but you'll also find Project Censored. .org as one of the providers of Giants, and we encourage people to order the book through Project Censored, because that helps support the project and continue this kind of research. So the book's doing well. It's being used in classrooms around the country, even more so. I'm working on an update or a different book right now on the Bohemian Grove.
Good.
And how the Grove is this transition of transnational class and capital, where they get to meet every summer and hang out together. It solidifies class solidarity.
Right.
And I think that one of the pieces of what you just talked about, the deep state, is what Peter Dale Scott calls the continuity of government, which has been around for a long time. And we certainly heard about it from Oliver North when he was describing what the planning they were doing as part of the government at the time.
Sure.
And that there's elements of power that are subterfuge, that are underneath what we are openly aware of. And
yes.
Certainly the Kennedys were aware of what Eisenhower had said. They were aware of the power of the CIA and the Pentagon. They were in many ways starting to challenge that, and they both were killed. Martin Luther King was doing the same thing, and he was killed. So presidents since then have complied with what the deep state or the unofficial opportunists in various capacities that are engaged with governmental planning and development behind the scenes. What they want.
Sure.
Government, I mean, they're not going to challenge that. They know what happens to people that do.
Exactly. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Look what happened. This is, there were rogue elements in the government. A good book on this also is Professor Michael Glennon of the Fletcher School, who's been on my show, who wrote a book called The Double Government, where he talks about the creation of the national security state during Truman's time and how that has become so pervasive and so interconnected. And it's part of the picture. It's impossible to put the whole picture in place, but we've put in a few pieces of the puzzle, and your book certainly does a good job of filling in a lot of the blanks. And so, Peter, I congratulate you on your work. I'd like to do some more broadcasting, particularly in some of the specifics in Project Censored. And again, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon, Peter Phillips.
Charles, it's been great talking to you, and I appreciate you talking about my book, Giants, the Global Power Elite.
All right, Peter, thanks so much.
Okay.
All right.